911. What's your emergency? My husband. He's been shot. Ma'am, stay calm. Who shot him? A pause. The kind that freezes blood. My son. Imagine opening your door to your own child. The person you raised, fed, loved, and staring down the barrel of a gun. Imagine your last thought being, why? A cut to a monthly allowance. A lie about to unravel. An inheritance too tempting to wait for. Tonight, you're about to meet 10 sons who didn't just betray their parents, they executed them. Some staged suicides. Others threw parties over the bodies. One confessed in real time to strangers on the internet. Another wrote a step-by-step murder manual and followed it to the letter. Princeton graduates, teenage gamers, Ivy League trust fund kids, brothers who wanted to outdo Columbine. They came from privilege. They came from suburbs. They came from families that looked perfect on the outside. And they destroyed it all in the most brutal ways imaginable. From Manhattan penthouses to small-town Florida. From chemical-filled bathtubs to shotgun massacres in Beverly Hills. These aren't just murders. They're calculated betrayals that will make you question how well you really know the people sleeping under your roof. So, before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I want to know where in the world you are as we uncover these chilling stories together. 10 Ks, 10 songs, 10 families destroyed. And it all starts with a man who had everything except gratitude. Case 1, Thomas Gilbert Jr., year 2015. Beekman Place, Manhattan. One of the most exclusive addresses in New York City, where hedge fund managers, diplomats, and old money live behind doormen and marble lobbies, where a one-bedroom can cost millions, where success isn't just expected, it's inherited. Thomas Gilbert Sr. built his empire from the ground up. A Princeton graduate himself, he founded Wainscott Capital Partners, a hedge fund managing tens of millions of dollars. He wore tailored suits, commanded boardrooms, and gave his son every advantage money could buy. That son, Thomas Gilbert Jr., Tommy to his friends, seemed destined for greatness. Princeton degree. Check. Ivy League connections. Check. A Chelsea apartment filled with surfboards, designer clothes, and the kind of lifestyle that screamed privilege. Check. But here's what the surfboards and Hermes belts were hiding. Tommy had no job, no career, no prospects. At 30 years old, he was living entirely off a $3,000 monthly allowance from his father. Every rent payment, every dinner at expensive restaurants, every trip to the Hamptons, all funded by Dad. And Tommy had gotten comfortable with that arrangement. So when Thomas Sr. sat his son down in late year 2014 and told him the allowance was being reduced, cut by roughly $700 a week, something inside Tommy snapped. Not broke, snapped. This wasn't about survival. Tommy wasn't going to be homeless. He wasn't going to starve. He was still going to have more money than most people his age earned working full-time jobs. But for Tommy, it wasn't about the money. It was about control. It was about being told no, for the first time in his life by the one man he couldn't manipulate. Sunday, January 4th, year 2015. Tommy walked into his parents' Beekman Place apartment, carrying a paper bag. Inside that bag was a Glock handgun he'd purchased weeks earlier in Ohio, crossing state lines to avoid New York's strict gun laws. He'd planned this. He'd thought about it. He'd made the decision that his father's life was worth less than $700 a week. Tommy found his mother, Shelley Gilbert, in the apartment and calmly asked her to go out and get him a sandwich. Just a simple errand. Something to get her out of the house for 15, maybe 20 minutes. Shelley didn't think twice. She grabbed her coat and left. The moment the door closed behind her, Tommy walked into his father's bedroom. Thomas Sr. was sitting there, probably reading, probably relaxing on what he thought was just another quiet Sunday afternoon. He looked up and saw his son. His Princeton-educated, surfboard-collecting, trust fund son. And then Tommy raised the Glock and fired a single shot into his father's head. Thomas Gilbert Sr. died instantly. 69 years old. Decades of hard work, of building a life, of providing for his family, gone in a heartbeat. But Tommy wasn't done. He had to make this look like something it wasn't. He carefully placed the gun in his father's hand, trying to stage the scene as a suicide. He arranged the body. He wiped surfaces. He did everything he thought would fool the police into believing his father had taken his own life. Then he left. Shelley Gilbert returned home with that sandwich about 20 minutes later. She walked into the bedroom and found her husband dead, blood pooling beneath him, a gun in his hand. And in that moment of horror and confusion, she did what any wife would do. She called 911. But here's where Tommy's plans started to crumble. Because Shelley knew her husband, she knew he wasn't suicidal. She knew something was wrong. And when the 911 dispatcher asked if she knew who might have done this, her voice cracked with a realization that would haunt her forever. My son. I didn't know he was this nuts. The investigation moved fast. Detectives arrived at the scene and immediately noticed inconsistencies. The gun placement was too neat. The angle of the shot was off. There were no signs of distress, no note, no history of depression. Thomas Sr. had been healthy, successful, and by all accounts, happy. Then they found the evidence that would bury Tommy. Loose .40 caliber ammunition scattered in the apartment, 2 matching shell casings, receipts tracing the Glock's purchase back to Ohio, receipts with Tommy's name on them, cell phone records placing Tommy at every key location leading up to the murder, surveillance footage, digital breadcrumbs that painted a perfect picture of premeditation. Prosecutors didn't just have a case, they had a slam dunk. Tommy's defense team tried the insanity plea. They painted him as mentally ill, as someone suffering from schizophrenia and paranoia, as a young man who didn't understand the consequences of his actions. They brought in psychiatrists. They pointed to erratic behavior. They begged the jury to see Tommy as sick, not evil. The jury wasn't buying it, because the evidence showed something different. It showed entitlement. It showed a man who had been handed everything and couldn't accept the one time someone said no. It showed someone who didn't kill in a fit of rage or during a psychotic break, but someone who planned, executed, and staged a murder because he couldn't handle a reduction in his allowance. On June 17, year 2019, Thomas Gilbert Jr. was convicted of second-degree murder and multiple weapons charges. The judge sentenced him to 30 years to life in prison. No more Chelsea apartment, no more surfboards, no more Beekman Place brunches, just a cell, and decades to think about the father he murdered over $700. As of year 2025, Thomas Gilbert Jr. remains behind bars. His trust fund, gone. His Ivy League future, shattered. His relationship with his mother, destroyed. All because he believed his comfort was worth more than his father's life. What time is it where you're watching this? Seriously, let me know in the comments. I'm curious how late you're staying up for these stories. But Tommy's story, as disturbing as it is just the beginning. Because the next case takes entitlement to an entirely different level. We're talking about a young man who built an entire fake life, complete with forged documents, fake job offers, and a web of lies so elaborate that when it started to unravel, he didn't just kill one parent, he killed both. And what he did to their bodies afterward will make your stomach turn. Case 2. Chandler Halderson, year 2021. Windsor, Wisconsin. A quiet town where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Where families go to church on Sundays. Where neighbors know each other's names. Where parents work hard to give their kids a better future. Bart and Krista Halderson were those parents. Hard-working, loving, proud. They had a son, Chandler, 23 years old, and they believed he was on the verge of something incredible. Because Chandler told them he was. He told them he was studying renewable energy engineering at Madison Area Technical College. He told them he was excelling in his classes. He told them he'd landed an internship, not just any internship, but one at SpaceX. Yes, Elon Musk's SpaceX. He showed them offer letters. He forwarded them emails from supposed supervisors. He even took phone calls from college advisors who assured Bart and Krista that their son was doing amazing work. Except none of it was real. Chandler hadn't finished a single semester at Madison Area Technical College. He'd dropped out after a few months and never looked back. There was no renewable energy degree. There was no SpaceX internship. The emails were spoofed. The phone calls were either Chandler himself using a fake voice or friends he'd convinced to play along. For years, Chandler had been living in a fantasy world he'd constructed with forged transcripts, fabricated job offers, and an elaborate web of lies that would make a con artist jealous. And his parents believed every word, because why wouldn't they? He was their son. They trusted him. But in late June year 2021, the house of cards started to collapse. Bart Halderson had questions. Real questions. The kind of questions that come from a father who's starting to sense something isn't adding up. So he did what any concerned parent would do. He picked up the phone and called Madison Area Technical College directly. And that's when the truth came out. No, Chandler Halderson is not enrolled here. No, he never completed his degree. No, we have no record of him attending classes in over 2 years. Bart hung up the phone and the world shifted. Every email, every call, every proud moment he'd shared with friends about his son's success, all of it was a lie. He confronted Chandler. We don't know exactly what was said in that conversation, but we know how it ended. On the afternoon of July 1st, year 2021, Chandler grabbed a rifle, walked up behind his father, and shot him in the back. No warning, no argument, just execution. Bart Halderson collapsed in his own home, bleeding out while his son stood over him. But Chandler had a problem. His mother, Krista, was out shopping. She'd be home soon. And she'd know, she'd see. She'd call 911. So Chandler waited. Hours later, Krista Halderson walked through the front door carrying shopping bags, probably thinking about dinner, probably excited to see her family. She had no idea her husband was already dead. She had no idea her son was about to become her killer. Chandler didn't hesitate. He shot his mother just like he'd shot his father. Quickly, efficiently, without mercy. And then the real horror began. Because killing his parents wasn't enough, Chandler had to hide what he'd done. He dragged their bodies into the basement, a basement that would soon become a crime scene so disturbing that seasoned detectives would struggle to describe it. He dismembered them, both of them, using saws, knives, whatever tools he could find. He placed body parts into plastic bins, like he was meal prepping. He filled containers with chemicals, acids, bases, anything he thought would dissolve human remains. The basement reeked of blood and bleach and death. But here's the thing about year 2021. You can't hide anything anymore. Not when your entire life is tracked by GPS, Snapchat location logs, and iPhone data that logs every single place you go. While Chandler was texting neighbors saying his parents had gone to their cabin for 4th of July weekend, his phone was telling a very different story. Snapchat's location feature placed him at rural dump sites miles away from home. His iPhone GPS showed repeated trips to remote areas near the Wisconsin River. Areas where, days later, police would find his mother's remains. Chandler thought he'd been careful. He thought he'd covered his tracks. But digital forensics don't lie. And then there was his girlfriend. She noticed things. The bleach. The bandages on his hands. The way he suddenly needed her help cleaning parts of the house she'd never been asked to clean before. The way he was acting, nervous, paranoid, different. When police questioned her, she didn't hold back. She told them everything. The suspicious requests, the odd behavior, the timeline that didn't make sense. She'd been unknowingly caught in Chandler's web of lies. And when she realized what he'd done, she became the prosecution's star witness. The evidence was overwhelming. Investigators found the blood-soaked basement. They found the plastic bins with human remains. They found chemicals still bubbling in containers. They found receipts from stores where Chandler had purchased cleaning supplies and bandages. Walmart's surveillance footage showed him calmly walking through aisles, buying materials to cover up a double homicide like he was shopping for groceries. And they found the digital trail, every location ping, every GPS coordinate, every piece of metadata that put him at dump sites where his parents' bodies had been discarded like trash. Chandler's trial in year 2022 was swift. His defense had nothing. No insanity plea would work here. No crime of passion argument would fly. This was calculated. This was premeditated. This was a man who killed his parents because his lies were about to be exposed, and he decided their lives were worth less than his fake resume. The jury convicted him on multiple counts. First-degree intentional homicide for both Bart and Krista Halderson, hiding a corpse, mutilating a corpse. The judge didn't hesitate. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of year 2025, Chandler Halderson sits in a Wisconsin prison cell. No SpaceX internship, no engineering degree. Just 4 concrete walls and the ghosts of the 2 people who loved him most. All because he couldn't admit he'd dropped out of college. But if you think that's the darkest story of parental murder on this list, wait until you hear about the young man who didn't just kill his family in private. He confessed to it in real time on a gaming platform, posting photos and details while strangers watched in horror, unsure if what they were seeing was real or some sick joke. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a joke. Case 3. Menhaz Zaman, year 2019. Markham, Ontario. A suburb just outside Toronto where immigrant families build new lives, where parents sacrifice everything for their children's education, where the dream is simple. Work hard, get a degree, make your family proud. Menhaz Zaman's parents lived that dream. They came to Canada for opportunity. They wanted their son to succeed. They believed in him. And Menhaz told them he was doing exactly what they hoped, studying engineering at York University, earning top grades, on track to graduate and land a high-paying job. His online friends knew a different version of Menhaz. To them, he was a gamer, someone who spent hours in Discord servers, chatting, playing, building a persona in a digital world where no one asked too many questions about real life. But here's the thing, Menhaz wasn't studying engineering. He'd never finished his degree at York University. He'd fabricated the entire thing. Fake transcripts, fake progress reports, fake everything. For years, while his family thought he was attending classes and studying for exams, Menhaz was at home, gaming, living in a fantasy world he'd constructed where he was still the successful son his parents believed him to be. And in July year 2019, that fantasy was about to collapse. His family was planning a graduation party. Relatives were going to come. Friends would be there. Everyone would celebrate Menhaz's engineering degree, the degree he didn't have. There would be questions. There would be congratulations. There would be nowhere to hide. Menhaz made a decision. If his fake life was about to be exposed, he'd eliminate everyone who would witness his shame. On July 27th, year 2019, he started with his grandmother, 59-year-old Firoza Begum. She was visiting from Bangladesh, excited to see her grandson graduate. Menhaz attacked her with a crowbar and knife. She didn't survive. Then his father, Moniruz Zaman, 59 years old, the man who'd worked tirelessly to provide for his family, gone. Then his sister, Malaysia Zaman, just 21 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Menhaz took that away. Finally, his mother, Mumtaz Zaman, 50 years old, the woman who'd given birth to him, raised him, believed in him. He killed her last. 4 people. 4 family members who loved him, dead in their own home. And then Menhaz did something that would make him one of the most disturbing killers in recent history. He went online. He opened Discord. And he started typing, "I've just slaughtered my entire family." His gaming friends thought he was joking. They thought it was dark humor, a bad attempt at edgelord shock value. But then Menhaz started posting photos, real photos, crime scene photos, bodies, blood, proof that this wasn't a joke. The Discord server exploded with messages. Some users still thought it was fake. Maybe Photoshop, maybe a sick prank. Others realized immediately that they were witnessing a confession to quadruple murder in real time. Menhaz kept typing. He explained why he did it. He talked about the lies. He talked about the graduation party he couldn't face. He talked about how he couldn't let his family find out the truth. He was calm. He was detailed. He was treating a Discord server like a confession booth. spilling his darkest secrets to strangers on the internet. And those strangers did the right thing. Moderators started taking screenshots. Every message, every photo, every confession. They contacted authorities. They traced his account. They provided everything they had to police. The gaming community that Menendez thought he was confiding in became the reason he'd be caught. When police arrived at the Markham home on July 29, year 2019, they found exactly what Menendez had described. 4 bodies, a massacre, a family erased because one man couldn't admit he'd failed. Menendez was arrested without resistance. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He'd already confessed to the entire internet. What was the point in denying it now? The evidence against him was ironclad. The Discord screenshots, the photos he'd posted himself, the messages where he admitted to every single murder. His defense attorneys had nothing to work with. This wasn't a case where guilt was in question. This was about what came next. In September year 2020, Menendez pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 40 years, one of the harshest sentences in Canadian history. But then something happened that would change his fate. In year 2022, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down the practice of stacking parole ineligibility periods. The ruling meant that even someone convicted of multiple murders couldn't be denied parole consideration beyond 25 years. Menendez's sentence was reduced. Not his guilt, not his conviction, just the timeline. He's now eligible for parole in year 2044, 25 years after the murders. As of year 2025, Menendez sits in a Canadian prison, stripped of the online persona he spent so much time building. No gaming, no Discord, no fantasy world to escape into. Just the reality of what he did and the 4 lives he destroyed because he couldn't admit he'd dropped out of school. The gaming community he thought he could trust with his darkest confession became the key to his capture. Every screenshot, every message, every photo he posted, it all became evidence. His digital trail didn't just track his location like Chandler Halderson's. It documented his confession in his own words. If you're finding this gripping, hit that like button. You know the drill. Now, you might think these cases are about elaborate lies unraveling, and you'd be right. But the next one is different. Because Tyler Hadley didn't kill his parents to hide a secret. He killed them because they were in the way of a party. And while their bodies were still warm, while blood soaked into the carpet beneath a pile of towels, he opened his front door to dozens of classmates and turned up the music. Case 4. Tyler Hadley, year 2011. Port St. Lucie, Florida. Summer. The kind of heat that makes teenagers desperate for something to do, somewhere to be. Anything to break the monotony of another Saturday night. Tyler Hadley, 17 years old, had an idea. He was going to throw a party. A big one. The kind people would talk about for weeks. He grabbed his phone and started posting on Facebook. "Party at my house tonight." Spread the word. Within hours, dozens of people had seen the invite. Friends, classmates, acquaintances. Everyone knew Tyler's parents were strict. They'd never allow a house party. So the obvious question started popping up in the comments. What about your parents? Are they cool with this? Tyler's response was simple. Don't worry about it. They won't be a problem. He was right. They wouldn't be a problem. Because by the time he sent that invite, both of his parents were already dead. That afternoon, Tyler had walked into his parents' bedroom with a claw hammer. His father, Blake Hadley, 47 years old, was sitting there, probably reading, probably relaxing, probably thinking about dinner. Tyler raised the hammer and brought it down on his father's skull, again and again and again. Blake tried to fight back. Of course he did, but Tyler didn't stop. He kept swinging, over and over. The medical examiner would later count the blows, more than 30 strikes to Blake's head and body. Then Tyler's mother, Mary Jo Hadley, 47 years old, came to see what the noise was about. She walked into a nightmare. Her husband bleeding, dying, her son standing over him with a hammer. She barely had time to process what was happening before Tyler turned on her. He beat her to death too. Another 40+ strikes with that same hammer. By the time he was done, he delivered 75 blows total between both parents. The walls were splattered with blood. The floor was slick with it. The bedroom looked like a slaughterhouse. And then Tyler started cleaning up. Not to call for help, not to turn himself in, but to prepare for his party. He dragged his parents' bodies into the master bedroom. He piled towels, clothes, and whatever else he could find on top of them. He locked the bedroom door. He cranked up the air conditioning to mask the smell. He took down family photos from the walls, anything that might remind people his parents existed. Then he turned on music, grabbed some drinks, and waited for his guests to arrive. Around 8 p.m., people started showing up, one by one, then in groups, until Tyler's house was packed with teenagers drinking, laughing, dancing. The music was blaring. The vibe was exactly what Tyler wanted: chaotic, loud, unforgettable. But some people noticed things were off. Why weren't Tyler's parents around? Where were all the family photos? And what was that smell? A few guests asked Tyler directly. His answers kept changing. They're out of town. They're sleeping upstairs. They went to a movie. They're at a friend's house. Nothing consistent. Nothing that made sense. Most people shrugged it off and kept partying. But Tyler's best friend, Michael Mandel, wasn't buying it. Michael pulled Tyler aside and asked him straight up, "Dude, where are your parents?" And that's when Tyler's face changed. He leaned in close, looked Michael in the eyes, and said the words that would end the party and his freedom. "They're in the bedroom. I killed them." Michael thought he was joking. He had to be joking. But Tyler's expression didn't change. There was no smile. No indication this was some sick prank. So Michael did something most 17-year-olds wouldn't have the guts to do. He asked to see proof. Tyler walked Michael into the master bedroom. He moved some of the towels and clothes aside. And there they were, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, bludgeoned to death. Blood everywhere, decomposing while a party raged just down the hall. Michael left the room in shock. He didn't know what to do. Tyler was his best friend, but his parents were dead, murdered, and Michael had just seen the bodies. He stayed at the party a little longer, maybe out of fear, maybe out of disbelief, maybe because his brain was trying to process what he'd just witnessed. But as soon as he could, Michael left, and he called the police. Officers arrived at Tyler's house just after midnight. By that point, most of the partygoers had left. The music was still playing. Empty cups and bottles were scattered everywhere. And Tyler was still there, acting like nothing had happened. Police arrested him at dawn without incident. No resistance, no remorse. When they asked him why he did it, Tyler's answer was as chilling as the crime itself. He was tired of his parents' rules. He wanted to do what he wanted, so he got rid of them. The evidence was overwhelming. The hammer was still in the house. Blood evidence confirmed everything. Witnesses testified about Tyler's strange behavior at the party. And Michael Mandel's testimony sealed it. Tyler had confessed directly to him and shown him the bodies. Tyler Hadley was tried as an adult and originally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But in year 2018, following Supreme Court rulings on juvenile sentencing, his case was reviewed. The court upheld a life sentence, but added the possibility of judicial review after 25 years. As of year 2025, Tyler Hadley remains imprisoned, awaiting that review in year 2036. He's now in his early 30s. He's spent over a decade behind bars. And every day, he lives with the fact that he murdered his parents so he could throw a party. What's the weather like where you are? Comment below. Michael Mandel, the best friend who turned him in, has said in interviews that he still struggles with guilt, wondering if he could have stopped it, wondering if he did the right thing by not calling 911 the moment Tyler confessed. But here's the truth. Michael did the only thing a decent person could do. He chose justice over loyalty. Tyler Hadley wanted to throw a party people would remember, and he succeeded, but not in the way he imagined. His name is now synonymous with one of the most disturbing acts of teenage violence in Florida's history. If you think a party over your parents' corpses is as dark as it gets, the next case will prove you wrong. Because Joel Michael Guy Jr. didn't just kill his parents. He wrote a manual, a step-by-step instruction guide on how to murder and dismember them. And then he followed it, every single step. Case 5. Joel Michael Guy Jr. Year 2016. Thanksgiving. A time for family. A time to gather around the table. Share a meal. Count your blessings. For most people, it's one of the few days of the year where everyone comes together, puts differences aside, and just enjoys being in the same room. For Joel Michael Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy, Thanksgiving year 2016 was supposed to be exactly that. Their son, Joel Michael Guy Jr., 28 years old, was coming home to Knoxville, Tennessee. They hadn't seen him in a while. He lived in Louisiana, and visits were rare. So when he said he'd be coming for the holiday, they were thrilled. They had no idea their son had written a manual on how to kill them. Not a vague plan. Not some impulsive thoughts scribbled in anger. A full instruction guide. A step-by-step blueprint titled in his own handwriting. Investigators would later call it the Book of Premeditation. And it detailed everything. How to ambush them. Where to strike. What tools to use. How to dismember the bodies. What chemicals to buy. How to dispose of the evidence. Even how to clean up afterward so no trace would remain. And at the end of the notebook, in Joel Jr.'s handwriting, was the motive spelled out in 2 words: money, all mine. Joel Sr. and Lisa weren't wealthy, but they had retirement savings. They had a house, they had assets, and Joel Jr. wanted it. All of it. But there was a problem. They were still alive. So he decided to fix that. On November 26th, year 2016, the day after Thanksgiving, Joel Jr. put his plan into action. His father was in the home gym, probably working out, probably thinking about leftovers or watching a game later. Joel Jr. walked in and attacked. He stabbed his father 42 times. 42. This wasn't a moment of rage. This wasn't a loss of control. This was methodical, brutal, sustained. Joel Sr. fought back. Defensive wounds on his hands proved that, but his son kept stabbing until he stopped moving. Then Joel Jr. waited. Hours later, Lisa Guy came home from grocery shopping. She walked through the front door carrying bags, probably excited to see her son, probably planning what to cook with the groceries she'd just bought. She had no idea her husband was already dead. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. Joel Jr. attacked her the moment she stepped inside, stabbed her repeatedly. Lisa didn't stand a chance. She collapsed in her own entryway, bleeding out, while her son stood over her, following the script he'd written days earlier. But killing them was only the first part of Joel's plan. The real horror, the part that would make even seasoned homicide detectives physically ill, came next. He dragged their bodies into the bathroom, and then he started dismembering them. Piece by piece, limb by limb. He used saws, knives, whatever tools he could find. He filled the bathtub with chemicals, sodium hydroxide, commonly known as lye, a substance so caustic it can dissolve organic matter. He placed body parts into pots of boiling water on the stove, trying to break them down faster. The bathroom became a processing facility. The kitchen became a crematorium. And Joel Jr. worked through it all like he was following a recipe. But here's the thing about chemicals that's strong. They don't just dissolve bodies. They eat through plumbing. They leave residue. They create evidence that's impossible to hide. And Joel Jr., for all his planning, didn't account for that. He also didn't account for the cuts and injuries he'd sustained during the murders. So the day after he killed his parents, Joel Jr. walked into a Walmart and bought bandages. And that Walmart had surveillance cameras. The footage showed him calmly walking through the aisles, grabbing medical supplies, checking out like he was buying groceries. No panic, no urgency. Just a man covering wounds he'd gotten while murdering and dismembering his parents. When police discovered Joel Sr. and Lisa Guy's bodies, or what was left of them, on November 29th, year 2016, The scene was so disturbing that investigators had to take breaks just to process what they were seeing. Body parts in containers, chemicals bubbling in the tub, a pot on the stove with human remains inside, blood soaked into every surface. And then they found the notebook, the prosecution's smoking gun. Every page was a window into Joel Jr.'s mind. Every line was proof of premeditation. He'd written down his plan, checked off steps as he completed them, and kept a record of his own depravity. Bleach the kitchen. Check. Sever limbs. Check. Flush remains. Check. Boil head in pot. Check. And at the bottom of one page, money, all mine. When Joel Michael Guy Jr. went to trial in year 2020, his defense had no options. The evidence was overwhelming. The notebook alone was enough to prove first-degree murder. But combined with the forensic evidence, the Walmart surveillance footage, the crime scene itself, there was no defense. The jury deliberated for just a few hours. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty on felony murder. Guilty on corpse abuse and mutilation. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, called it the most depraved case of my career. He sentenced Joel Michael Guy Jr. to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of year 2025, Joel Jr. is housed at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tennessee. He's serving consecutive life sentences. He'll never see the outside of a prison again. The money he killed for, he never got a cent. The inheritance he thought would be all his, it went to cover the cost of the investigation and prosecution. The notebook he wrote, the one he thought would help him get away with murder, became the very thing that guaranteed he'd spend the rest of his life in a cell. He documented his own downfall, line by line, in his own handwriting. Joel Michael Guy Jr. wanted his parents' money so badly, he was willing to stab them, dismember them, and dissolve them in chemicals. And in the end, all he got was a cage. But as calculated and horrific as Joel's crime was, he at least kept it within his own family. The next case takes that horror and multiplies it. Because Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. didn't just kill his parents. He killed his entire family. Mom, dad, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, 6 people, all shot in their sleep. And the house where it happened would become the most infamous address in America, spawning a legend that's still debated today. You've heard of it. The Amityville Horror. Case 6, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., year 1974. 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York. A large Dutch colonial house with distinctive quarter-moon windows that look like eyes staring out at the street. Beautiful, spacious, the kind of house a family dreams of owning. For the DeFeo family, it was supposed to be exactly that, a dream home. Ronald DeFeo, Sr., a successful car dealership manager. His wife, Louise. Their 5 children. 23-year-old Ronald Jr., nicknamed Butch, 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John Matthew. On the night of November 13th, year 1974, every single one of them was asleep in their beds, safe, secure, in their own home. And then, around 3:15 in the morning, Butch DeFeo walked through the house with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle and executed them all. One by one, room by room, starting with his parents. Ronald Sr. shot twice in the back as he slept. Louise shot twice as well. Both died in their bed, probably never knowing what hit them. Then Butch moved to his siblings' rooms. Dawn, 18 years old, shot in the head. Allison, 13, shot in the head. Mark, 12, shot in the back. John Matthew, just 9 years old, shot in the back. 6 people. 6 family members, all shot in their sleep, all found lying face down in their beds. And here's what made investigators' skin crawl. Neighbors heard nothing. No screams, no gunshots, no sounds of struggle, just silence. When Butch ran into a local bar later that evening, screaming that someone had killed his family, he played the role of the traumatized survivor perfectly. He was frantic, panicked, begging people to help. Friends rushed to the house with him. They found the bodies. They called police. and for a brief moment, it looked like Butch was the only member of the DeFeo family who'd survived a horrific massacre. But investigators noticed things that didn't add up. The rifle was found in the house, wiped completely clean of fingerprints. Whoever killed 6 people in their beds somehow had time to clean the murder weapon but left it at the scene. Strange. There were no signs of forced entry. No signs of a robbery. Nothing was stolen. The family's valuables were untouched. And most suspicious of all, Butch's story kept changing. First, he claimed it was a mob hitman. His father had gambling debts, he said. Someone came to collect. But when police pressed him on details, the story fell apart. No evidence of mob involvement. No threats. No debts big enough to warrant wiping out an entire family. Then, under interrogation, Butch confessed. Yes, he'd killed them, all of them. But it wasn't his fault. Voices had commanded him to do it. Demonic voices. Supernatural forces that controlled his actions. His defense team ran with the insanity plea. They brought in psychiatrists who testified that Butch suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, that he genuinely believed he was hearing voices, that he couldn't distinguish right from wrong at the time of the murders. But the prosecution brought in their own experts. And their diagnosis was very different. Antisocial personality disorder. Not insanity. Not schizophrenia. Just a man with no empathy, no remorse, and a long history of violent behavior who decided to kill his family. The jury heard testimony about Butch's drug use, his violent temper, his constant fights with his father over money and control. They heard how he'd abused his siblings, how he'd threatened his parents, how he'd been given chance after chance to straighten out his life and had blown every single one. And they heard the evidence. The rifle, the ballistics, the timeline, the confession. On November 21st, year 1975, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. was convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 6 consecutive 25-to-life terms, 150 years minimum before he'd even be eligible for parole. Butch would spend the rest of his life insisting he didn't act alone. In later interviews, he claimed his sister Dawn had helped him, that she'd killed some of the family members before he turned on her. But no evidence ever supported that claim. Dawn was a victim, just like the rest of them. Butch DeFeo died in prison on March 12, year 2021, at the age of 69. He'd spent nearly 47 years behind bars, still maintaining various versions of his story, still trying to shift blame, still refusing to take full responsibility for the fact that he slaughtered his entire family in cold blood. But here's where the story takes a turn into something stranger than the murders themselves. 13 months after the DeFeo murders, a new family moved into 112 Ocean Avenue, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children. They bought the house at a steep discount. After all, who wants to live in a place where 6 people were murdered? They moved in on December 18th, year 1975, and 28 days later, they fled in the middle of the night, claiming the house was haunted. According to the Lutzes, they experienced demonic presences, green slime oozing from the walls, swarms of flies in the dead of winter, cold spots, voices, apparitions of a demonic pig-like creature, and a presence so evil they couldn't stay another night. Their story became a best-selling book, The Amityville Horror, which was adapted into a blockbuster film in year 1979. Suddenly, 112 Ocean Avenue wasn't just a murder house. It was the haunted house. The most infamous address in America. Paranormal investigators claimed it was built on an old burial ground. Psychics said the land was cursed. Horror fans made pilgrimages to see the house with the quarter-moon windows. But here's the truth that often gets lost in the ghost stories. Whether or not the Lutz family experienced anything supernatural, 6 real people died in that house. And they didn't die because of demons or curses. They died because Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. decided their lives were worth less than whatever rage or greed or control he felt he deserved. Don't let this be the last chilling story you hear. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The Amityville horror legend has endured for over 50 years. Books, movies, documentaries, debates over what really happened in that house after the murders. But the real horror isn't supernatural. It's the fact that a son murdered his parents and 4 of his siblings in their sleep, and then spent the rest of his life trying to blame anyone and anything else. If you think the Amityville case is shocking because of the body count, the next story will prove that sometimes it's not about how many people you kill, it's about the calculated cruelty behind it. Because Seth Gonzalez didn't just murder his family. He spray-painted racial slurs on the walls to make it look like a hate crime, staged an elaborate cover-up, and almost got away with it. Almost. Case 7. Seth Gonzalez. Year 2001. North Ryde, Sydney, Australia. July 10th, year 2001. Around 7 p.m., Seth Gonzalez called the police. His voice panicked, breathless, terrified. "Please, you have to come. Someone broke into my house. My family, they're dead. There's writing on the walls." Officers arrived at the Gonzalez home within minutes and found exactly what Seth had described. 3 bodies, blood everywhere, and spray painted across multiple walls in large, aggressive letters. F. Of Asians, KKK. It looked like a hate crime. A racially motivated home invasion. The kind of thing that sends shockwaves through a community and makes the news for weeks. Except it wasn't. The victims were Teddy Gonzalez, 46 years old, a lawyer who'd worked hard his entire life. Mary Gonzalez, 43, known as Loeva, a woman dedicated to her family and her faith. And their daughter, Claudine, just 18 years old, still in her school uniform, with her whole future ahead of her. Seth Gonzalez, their 20-year-old son, was the only survivor, and he was also their killer. Teddy and Mary Gonzalez had adopted Seth when he was a child, bringing him from the Philippines to Australia and giving him every opportunity they could: private school, a stable home, support for whatever he wanted to pursue. They had high expectations, yes, but they also had the kind of love that parents who choose their children often have. Intentional, committed, unconditional. Seth was expected to succeed in university. He was enrolled in a business program, and his parents believed he was doing well, but the truth was very different. Seth was failing, badly. He wasn't attending classes. He wasn't studying. He was spending his time partying, lying about his grades, and desperately trying to keep up appearances. And there was something else motivating Seth. Something darker than just embarrassment over failing grades. Money. The Gonzalez family had assets worth approximately $1.5 million. Property, savings, investments. And if Teddy and Mary discovered Seth was failing university, they might cut him off. They might change their will. They might give more to Claudine, who was excelling in school and had a bright future ahead of her. Seth couldn't let that happen. So on the afternoon of July 10th, year 2001, he decided to kill them all and make it look like someone else did it. He waited at home. His father, Teddy, arrived first. Seth ambushed him, stabbing him repeatedly. Teddy fought back. Defensive wounds on his hands showed that. But Seth kept stabbing until his adoptive father was dead. Then Mary came home. She walked through the door, probably calling out for her husband, probably wondering why he hadn't answered his phone. Seth attacked her the moment she stepped inside. She died in her own home, murdered by the son she'd loved and raised as her own. Finally, Claudine arrived, 18 years old, still in her private school uniform, excited about her future. Seth didn't hesitate. He killed his sister just like he'd killed his parents. Stabbed her to death in the home where she'd grown up. And then Seth got to work on the cover-up. He grabbed spray paint and went through the house, writing racist slurs on the walls. F. Of Asians, KKK. He wanted police to think this was a hate crime. That white supremacists had targeted his family because they were Filipino. That he was a victim who'd narrowly escaped. He staged the scene carefully, made it look like a break-in, created a narrative where he'd been out during the attack and came home to find his family slaughtered. Then he called 911, put panic in his voice, and played the role of the traumatized survivor. But investigators weren't buying it. The crime scene didn't match Seth's story. There was no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The spray paint was too neat, too deliberate, not the kind of chaotic vandalism you'd see in an actual hate crime. And the stab wounds showed a level of personal rage that didn't fit with a random attack by strangers. Then there was Seth's behavior. He was too calm, too composed. Grieving families don't usually start asking about inheritance and life insurance within days of a triple homicide. Detectives dug into Seth's life and found the motive immediately. He was failing university. He was lying to his parents about his grades, and he stood to inherit a significant estate if his entire family was dead. They also found evidence that Seth had researched how to stage a crime scene. He'd looked up how to make a murder look like a burglary, how to avoid leaving evidence, how to create an alibi. But the biggest piece of evidence came from Seth himself. He'd made calls and sent messages around the time of the murders that placed him at the house, not out, like he'd claimed. His timeline didn't match. His story had holes investigators could drive a truck through. In year 2004, Seth Gonzalez went to trial for the murder of his adoptive family. The prosecution laid out the case piece by piece: the failing grades, the financial motive, the staged hate crime, the forensic evidence that proved Seth had been at the house during the murders. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. Guilty on 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The judge sentenced him to 3 concurrent life terms without the possibility of parole. Seth Gonzalez would spend the rest of his life in prison. But that's not where the story ends. For over 2 decades, Seth has filed appeal after appeal, claiming his trial was unfair, claiming there was evidence that wasn't considered, claiming he was wrongly convicted. Every appeal was denied. Every attempt to overturn his conviction failed. Until year 2025. In August year 2025, Seth won the right to appeal his sentence, not his conviction, but his sentence, based on claims of post-traumatic stress disorder and alleged childhood abuse. His legal team argues that he should be eligible for parole, that the life without parole sentence was too harsh given his mental state at the time of the murders. As of now, his conviction stands. He's still guilty of murdering Teddy, Mary, and Claudine Gonzalez. But the legal fight isn't over. The appeal process is ongoing, and there's a possibility, however slim, that his sentence could be reduced. The case remains one of Australia's most infamous family annihilations, not just because of the brutality, but because of the cold calculation behind it. Seth didn't kill in a moment of rage. He planned it. He executed it. And then he tried to blame it on racism, using his own family's ethnicity as a prop in his cover-up. Teddy and Mary Gonzalez gave Seth a life most people would be grateful for. They chose him. They loved him. They provided for him. And he repaid that love by stabbing them to death and spray painting slurs on the walls to cover his tracks. If you think staging a hate crime to cover up a family murder is as calculated as it gets, wait until you hear about the Bever brothers. Because Robert and Michael Bever didn't just plan to kill their family. They planned to make it the start of a nationwide killing spree. They studied Columbine. They made lists. They bought tactical gear. And on July 22nd, year 2015, they put their plan into action, stabbing 5 family members to death while 2 survived to tell the story. Case 8. Robert and Michael Bever, year 2015, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. A quiet suburb outside Tulsa where families raise their kids, where neighbors wave to each other, where nothing truly horrific is supposed to happen. The Bever family lived in a modest home on Magnolia Court. David Bever, the father, April, the mother, and their 7 children ranging from 2 years old to 18. A large family, by today's standards, but by all accounts, they were quiet, kept to themselves, homeschooled the kids. What the neighbors didn't know was that inside that home, 2 of those children, 18-year-old Robert and 16-year-old Michael, were planning a massacre. Not just of their family. That was only step 1. They'd been studying mass killers for months. Columbine was their obsession. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were their heroes. They read manifestos. They watched documentaries. They studied tactics, and they came to a conclusion. 13 dead at Columbine wasn't enough. They could do better. Their plan was simple in its horror. Kill the entire family, burn down the house, drive cross-country and kill random people at schools, malls, public places, rack up a body count that would make them the most infamous killers in American history. They even picked a name for themselves. They recorded videos. They made lists. They bought tactical gear, body armor, knives, ammunition. They stored everything in their room, preparing for the day they'd launch their spree. And on the evening of July 22nd, year 2015, they decided that day had come. Around 11:30 p.m., Robert and Michael grabbed their knives and started with their parents. David Bever was attacked first. He fought back, tried to protect his family, but he was outnumbered and unarmed. Robert and Michael stabbed him to death in front of his children. April Bever tried to run, tried to escape, tried to call for help, but her sons chased her down and stabbed her repeatedly. She died in her own home, murdered by the children she'd given birth to and homeschooled. Then the brothers moved to their siblings. Daniel, 12 years old, stabbed to death. Christopher, 7 years old, stabbed to death. Victoria, 5 years old, stabbed to death. 5 family members, parents and 3 young children, slaughtered in a matter of minutes. The house was soaked in blood. The screams had stopped, and Robert and Michael thought they'd completed phase 1 of their plan. But they'd missed 2. 13-year-old Crystal Bever had been stabbed multiple times. Her neck, her arms, her torso. She was bleeding, fading in and out of consciousness, but she was still alive. And she did something extraordinarily brave. She crawled, through the blood, through the carnage. She found a phone, and in a voice barely above a whisper, because she couldn't let her brothers hear her, she called 911. "My brother's attacking my family," she whispered. "Please help." The dispatcher stayed on the line with her, trying to keep her conscious, trying to get information, trying to send help as fast as possible. Crystal gave them the address. She told them her brothers had knives. She told them people were dead, and she stayed on the line, hiding, bleeding, praying her brothers wouldn't find her before police arrived. In another room, 2-year-old Autumn Bever sat quietly, somehow untouched. The brothers had either forgotten about her in the chaos or decided she was too young to matter. She survived without a scratch, the only member of the family who wouldn't carry physical scars from that night. Police arrived within minutes. They found Crystal barely alive. They found little Autumn sitting alone, surrounded by the bodies of her family. And they found Robert and Michael Bever calmly standing in the house, covered in blood, waiting. When officers searched the home, they found the full extent of the brothers' plan. Tactical gear laid out like they were preparing for war. Multiple knives. A flash drive containing detailed plans for their nationwide killing spree. Locations, targets, methods, lists of schools and public places they intended to attack. This wasn't a family annihilation born out of abuse or desperation. This was the opening act of a mass murder fantasy. Robert and Michael Bever wanted to be famous. They wanted their names in history books. They wanted to outdo Columbine, and they'd murdered their own family, their parents, their little brothers and sisters, as practice. The trials were swift. Robert Bever, 18 at the time of the murders, pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to kill. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, 6 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of ever walking free. Michael Bever, 16 at the time, was tried as an adult. The prosecution argued that his age didn't diminish his culpability. He'd planned, participated, and shown no remorse. The jury agreed. Michael was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences. Technically, he could be eligible for parole someday, but that someday wouldn't come for centuries. Crystal Bever survived her injuries. That 13-year-old girl who whispered for help while bleeding out, she lived. She testified against her brothers. She carried the weight of being the sole survivor who could tell the world what Robert and Michael had done. And she's had to live every day since, knowing that her own brothers tried to kill her. Autumn, just 2 years old at the time, was too young to remember the night her family was massacred. She was placed with relatives, given a chance at a life away from the horror. The Bever house on Magnolia Court became a symbol of evil in Broken Arrow. No one wanted to live there. No one wanted to walk past it. The city eventually bought the property, demolished the house in year 2019, and built something in its place that would honor the victims instead of preserving the crime scene. They called it Reflection Park, a peaceful space with trees, benches, and a memorial. A place for the community to remember David, April, Daniel, Christopher, and Victoria Bever, not as victims of a senseless massacre, but as people who deserve to be remembered. As of year 2025, both Robert and Michael Bever remain imprisoned. Their dream of infamy ended the night they were arrested. They didn't get their nationwide spree. They didn't get their place in history as the deadliest killers in America. They got life sentences and a demolished house replaced by a park. But their names are still spoken, not with the twisted reverence they wanted, but with disgust. Because they didn't just kill strangers, they killed their parents. They killed their little brothers and sisters. Children who trusted them. Children who looked up to them. And all because they wanted to be famous. If you think two brothers murdering their family as the start of a killing spree is as cold-blooded as it gets, the next case will show you that evil doesn't always announce itself with manifestos and tactical gear. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, almost surgical. Because Jeremy Bamber didn't just kill 5 family members, he staged the perfect crime, framed his sister for it, and came within inches of getting away with it. If it wasn't for one tiny detail, a piece of forensic evidence no bigger than your thumb, he'd be a free man today. Case 9. Jeremy Bamber, year 1985. White House Farm, Essex, England. A sprawling estate in the English countryside. The kind of place where wealthy families live quiet lives away from the chaos of London. Where land stretches for acres, and the closest neighbors are too far away to hear a gunshot. On the morning of August 7th, year 1985, Jeremy Bamber called police at 3:26 a.m. His voice was shaking, frantic. "You need to get to White House Farm. My father just called. He said my sister's gone crazy. She's got a gun. Please hurry." Officers rushed to the estate and found the front door locked. They could see movement inside through the windows, but no one answered. They waited for armed response units. Hours passed. Finally, they breached the door. Inside, they found 5 bodies. Neville Bamber, 61 years old, Jeremy's adoptive father, shot multiple times, beaten with the rifle butt. He'd fought back, his injuries showed that, but he'd lost. June Bamber, 61, Jeremy's adoptive mother, shot in her bed. Sheila Caffell, 28, Jeremy's adoptive sister, shot twice, lying in the master bedroom next to a rifle. And Sheila's 6-year-old twins, Daniel and Nicholas, shot in their beds while they slept. 5 people dead. And the scene looked exactly like what Jeremy had described on the phone. A murder-suicide. Sheila, who had a history of mental illness and had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, had apparently snapped, killed her parents and children, then turned the gun on herself. At least, that's what it looked like. Jeremy played the devastated survivor role perfectly. He told police his father had called him in a panic, saying Sheila had gone mad and had the gun. By the time Jeremy arrived, it was too late. Everyone was dead. Police initially accepted the murder-suicide theory. Sheila had a documented history of psychiatric issues. She'd struggled with postpartum depression. She'd been in and out of treatment. The scene seemed to support Jeremy's story. But then investigators started finding problems. Little things that didn't quite fit. First, the phone call. Jeremy claimed his father had called him. Panicked, saying Sheila had the gun. But there was no record of that call. No outgoing call from White House Farm around the time Jeremy claimed he'd received it. And the phone in the house, the one Neville allegedly used to call Jeremy, had no blood on it, even though Neville had been bleeding heavily from his injuries. How does a man beaten and shot multiple times make a phone call without getting a single drop of blood on the receiver? Second, the rifle. It was found next to Sheila's body, positioned as if she'd shot herself and collapsed. But Sheila was 5'7", and the rifle had a 25-inch barrel with a sound suppressor attached. The length made it nearly impossible for her to have shot herself in the way the wounds suggested. The angle was wrong. The position was wrong. And then came the evidence that would destroy Jeremy's story completely. Jeremy's relatives, specifically Sheila's former in-laws, had been suspicious from the beginning. They didn't believe Sheila was capable of killing her children. They pushed police to look deeper. And one family member did something crucial. They searched the gun cupboard at White House Farm where the rifle had been stored. Inside, they found the sound suppressor. But wait, the sound suppressor was supposed to be on the rifle, the one found next to Sheila's body. How could it be in the cupboard? Police realized there were two sound suppressors. One had been found still attached to the rifle, but this one, the one in the cupboard, had something on it that changed everything. Blood. Red paint. And then, when tested, Sheila's blood. If the silencer in the cupboard had Sheila's blood on it, that meant it had been used during the murders, then removed from the rifle and placed back in the cupboard after Sheila was already dead. Which meant Sheila couldn't have shot herself. Someone else had killed her, staged the scene, removed the silencer, and put it back where it belonged. And the only person who had access to the house after the murders and before police arrived was Jeremy Bamber. The investigation shifted. Detectives started looking at Jeremy not as a grieving son, but as a suspect. They discovered motive quickly. Jeremy stood to inherit the entire Bamber estate, a fortune worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. With his parents dead and Sheila dead, it all went to him. Then, his ex-girlfriend came forward. Julie Mugford testified that Jeremy had talked about killing his family for months. He'd told her he wanted them dead. He'd bragged about how he'd frame Sheila for it. He'd described his plan in detail. Make it look like Sheila's breakdown, kill everyone, stage the suicide, walk away rich. According to Julie, Jeremy had even called her after the murders, laughing, saying it's done, and celebrating the fact that he'd pulled it off. The evidence piled up. The silencer with Sheila's blood, the impossible angles of her wounds, the missing phone call, Jeremy's financial motive, his ex-girlfriend's testimony. On October 28th, year 1986, Jeremy Bamber was convicted on 5 counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to a whole life tariff, a sentence reserved for the most heinous crimes in the UK. It meant Jeremy would never be eligible for parole. He would die in prison. But Jeremy didn't accept his fate quietly. For nearly 4 decades, he's filed appeal after appeal, claiming he's innocent, claiming the evidence was mishandled, claiming his ex-girlfriend lied, claiming the police framed him. He's become one of the UK's most vocal advocates for wrongful conviction reform, insisting from his cell that he didn't kill his family. In year 2024 and year 2025, the Criminal Cases Review Commission reviewed some of his claims. They looked at the evidence again. They examined the forensic reports. They considered new testimony, and they upheld his conviction. Every single count. The silencer evidence alone was enough, but combined with everything else, the motive, the staged scene, the ex-girlfriend's testimony, there was no doubt. Jeremy Bamber murdered his adoptive parents, his sister, and his 6-year-old nephews, then tried to frame Sheila for it. As of year 2025, Jeremy Bamber remains behind bars, still claiming innocence, still filing appeals, still insisting he's the victim of a miscarriage of justice. But the facts don't lie. The blood on the silencer doesn't lie. Sheila Caffell didn't kill her family. Jeremy did. And he almost got away with it. If a single piece of forensic evidence, a silencer no bigger than a thermos, hadn't been found in that cupboard, Jeremy Bamber would have inherited a fortune and walked free. But that one piece of evidence unraveled his entire plan and ensured he'd spend the rest of his life in a cell. Now, we've covered cases driven by greed, by lies, by twisted fantasies of fame. But the final case on this list is the one that sparked a debate that's still raging today. Were they cold-blooded killers who murdered their parents for money? Or were they victims of years of abuse who finally snapped? The trial became a media circus. The crime scene photos were horrific. And the question at the center of it all, abuse or entitlement, has never been fully answered. Lyle and Erik Menendez, Beverly Hills, year 1989, shotguns, and a 911 call that started with a lie. Case 10. Lyle and Erik Menendez, year 1989, Beverly Hills, California, August 20th, year 1989, 11:47 p.m. A 911 call comes in. A young man's voice, sobbing, hyperventilating, barely able to get the words out. Someone killed my parents. The dispatcher tries to calm him down, asks for his location, asks what happened. I don't know. We came home and, oh my God, they're dead. Someone killed my parents. That young man was 21-year-old Lyle Menendez. And within hours, his 18-year-old brother Erik would be by his side, both of them playing the role of devastated sons who'd just lost their parents to a brutal home invasion. Except it wasn't a home invasion. And the only killers were Lyle and Erik themselves. Jose Menendez, 45 years old, was a Cuban immigrant who'd built an entertainment empire. He'd risen through the ranks to become a powerful executive at Live Entertainment, a division of Carolco Pictures. He was demanding, controlling, obsessed with success. He pushed his sons to be the best at everything: tennis, academics, business. Failure wasn't an option in the Menendez household. Kitty Menendez, 47, was a former beauty queen who'd given up her own career to support her husband and raise their sons. She struggled with depression, with feelings of inadequacy, with the weight of living in Jose's shadow. From the outside, the Menendez family had it all. A $6 million mansion in Beverly Hills, luxury cars, private schools, country club memberships, the American dream realized. But on the night of August 20th, year 1989, that dream ended in a bloodbath. Lyle and Erik walked into the den where their parents were watching TV and eating berries. Jose was sitting on the couch. Kitty was beside him. They were relaxed, comfortable, probably thinking about heading to bed soon. And then their sons raised shotguns and started firing. Jose was shot point blank in the back of the head. The first blast killed him almost instantly. But the brothers didn't stop there. They kept shooting and shooting. Kitty tried to run. She made it a few feet before the brothers shot her in the leg, bringing her down. She crawled, begging for her life, pleading with her sons to stop. They reloaded and kept firing. One final shot to her face ended it. 15 rounds total. The den looked like a war zone. Blood on the walls, blood on the furniture, shell casings everywhere, and Jose and Kitty Menendez, unrecognizable. Lyle and Erik left the house, disposed of their bloody clothes and the shotguns, went to a movie to establish an alibi, then came home and discovered the bodies. Lyle called 911 and delivered an Oscar-worthy performance. Police initially believed them. The crime scene was consistent with a professional hit. Jose had enemies. He was ruthless in business, had made people angry, had received threats. Investigators thought maybe it was the mob, maybe a business rival, maybe someone Jose had crossed on his way to the top. And Lyle and Erik played the grieving sons perfectly. They cried at the funeral. They comforted relatives. They gave interviews saying they just wanted justice for their parents. But then they started spending money. A lot of money. Within months of the murders, the brothers had blown through $700,000. Lyle bought a Porsche. Erik hired a tennis coach for $50,000. They bought Rolex watches. They invested in a restaurant. They went on shopping sprees, took trips, lived like they'd just won the lottery. People started noticing. Why were these grieving sons spending their inheritance like there was no tomorrow? Then Erik made a mistake. He confessed to his therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, that he and Lyle had killed their parents. The therapist's girlfriend overheard the session and eventually went to police. In March year 1990, 7 months after the murders, Lyle and Erik Menendez were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial that followed would become one of the most watched and debated in American history. Because the defense didn't deny the killings. Instead, they presented a narrative that shocked the nation. Jose Menendez had sexually abused both sons for years. Kitty knew about it and did nothing. The brothers lived in fear, suffered in silence, and finally snapped, killing their parents in what they claimed was self-defense. The first trial in year 1993 ended in mistrials for both brothers. The juries were deadlocked, split between those who believed the abuse claims and saw the brothers as victims, and those who saw them as entitled killers who murdered for money. The abuse testimony was graphic, emotional, and deeply disturbing. Erik testified about years of molestation starting when he was 6 years old. Lyle testified about being raped by his father. Family members testified about Jose's controlling, abusive behavior. Psychologists testified about the trauma the brothers had endured. But the prosecution argued it was all a lie, a manipulation, a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility for a cold-blooded, premeditated execution. The second trial in year 1995 was different. The judge severely limited the abuse testimony. Much of the defense's narrative was barred from the courtroom. The focus shifted back to the evidence, the planning, the shotgun purchases, the execution-style murders, the spending spree. On March 20th, year 1996, both Lyle and Erik Menendez were convicted of first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The brothers were separated and sent to different prisons. For over 20 years, they had no contact. They communicated through letters, but they couldn't see each other, couldn't talk, couldn't be in the same room. Until year 2018, both brothers were transferred to the same facility, Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. For the first time since year 1996, Lyle and Erik were reunited. Photos of their emotional embrace went viral. Documentaries covered their reunion, and public interest in their case reignited. Because here's the thing. The debate never ended. Were they cold-blooded killers motivated by greed? Or were they abused victims who'd reached a breaking point? The first jury couldn't decide. The public couldn't decide. And even today, in year 2025, people are still arguing about it. New evidence has emerged over the years. A letter Erik wrote to a cousin months before the murders, describing the abuse. Testimony from family members who say they witnessed Jose's inappropriate behavior. Advocacy groups pushing for the brothers' release, arguing they were victims long before they became killers. In year 2025, Lyle and Erik have a pending habeas corpus petition, a legal challenge arguing that new evidence of abuse warrants a resentencing or even a new trial. Their attorneys claim that if the abuse testimony had been fully allowed in the second trial, the outcome would have been different. As of now, both brothers remain in prison, serving life without parole. They're in their 50s now. They've spent over 3 decades behind bars. Lyle is married, twice, actually, both marriages happening while he's been incarcerated. Erik is also married. They've built lives within the prison system, knowing they'll likely never leave. But their story refuses to die. Documentaries, podcasts, social media campaigns. There's a constant stream of content debating whether justice was served or whether 2 abuse victims are rotting in prison for defending themselves. Which case shocked you the most? Drop a comment. The Menendez brothers represent America's ultimate true crime debate. When does victimhood end and accountability begin? Can you be both, an abuse survivor and a murderer? Does suffering justify violence? Or is there a line that, once crossed, erases sympathy? Those questions remain unanswered. And maybe that's why, 36 years later, we're still talking about Lyle and Erik Menendez. 10 families destroyed. From Manhattan penthouses to suburban homes, from Thanksgiving dinners to house parties, from Discord confessions to whole life sentences, each case stripped away the idea that family bonds are unbreakable. Because when entitlement meets desperation, when lies threaten to unravel, when greed overpowers love, some sons decide their parents' lives are worth less than their secrets. 10 betrayals. 10 families erased. Thomas Gilbert Jr. killed his father over $700 a week. Chandler Halderson dismembered his parents because he dropped out of college. Menhaz Zaman slaughtered 4 family members to avoid a graduation party where his lies would be exposed. Tyler Hadley threw a house party while his parents' bodies decomposed in the next room. Joel Michael Guy Jr. wrote a murder manual and followed it step by step on Thanksgiving. Ronald DeFeo Jr. executed 6 family members in their sleep, spawning a legend that outlived the truth. Seth Gonzalez staged a hate crime to cover up a triple murder for inheritance money. Robert and Michael Bever wanted to outdo Columbine and started by stabbing their parents and siblings. Jeremy Bamber framed his sister for a massacre he committed to inherit an estate. And Lyle and Erik Menendez sparked a debate that's still raging 36 years later. Were they killers or victims? Different motives, different methods, different outcomes. But one common thread runs through every single case: the complete destruction of the bond between parent and child. Some killed for money they hadn't earned. Some killed to hide failures they couldn't admit. Some killed for control they'd never had. And some killed because they believed their comfort, their image, their freedom was worth more than the lives of the people who raised them. What breaks that bond? What turns a son into a killer? Is it entitlement, being handed everything until the word no feels like a death sentence? Is it desperation, living a lie so big that murder seems like the only way out? Is it greed, looking at your parents not as people, but as obstacles between you and an inheritance? Or is it something darker, something we can't fully understand, a void where empathy should be? A disconnect so profound that even your own family becomes disposable. These weren't crimes of passion. These weren't accidents. These were calculated decisions made by sons who looked at their parents and saw problems to be solved rather than people to be loved. And the scariest part? Most of these families looked normal from the outside. Ivy League degrees, suburban homes, family dinners, holiday gatherings. There were no neon signs warning that violence was brewing. Just sons and parents living under the same roof until one day, that roof became a crime scene. As of year 2025, all 10 of these men are either dead or serving life sentences. Their freedom is gone. Their futures are gone. And the families they destroyed can never be brought back. So I'll leave you with this. If someone is willing to murder the people who gave them life, what does that say about the value they place on anyone else's? If this deep dive into the darkest betrayals gripped you, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and drop a like. More chilling stories coming your way. Because the truth is, these 10 cases aren't isolated incidents. There are more stories out there, more sons, more daughters, more families torn apart by the people who were supposed to protect them. And we're just getting started. Stay safe out there. And maybe, just maybe, lock your bedroom door tonight.